it's Winston from Strides and Rides, and today I'm going to be doing part 2 of a video that I started a while ago about our health, well-being, and overall fitness levels. Now, I don't think aging is a problem that needs to be solved. I think aging is simply a chapter of our lives that needs to be lived, and it needs to be lived out loud with a lot of vitality. So I want to start with a question, and the question is this: Can you fit it in? And what am I asking you to fit in? Well, everybody's familiar with this number right here, right? 150 minutes. 150 minutes worth of moderate exercise every week is what the government recommends for us to get to stay healthy. Now, if you break that down, 150 minutes comes out to 2.5 hours, or if you look at it daily, 21.4 minutes. So my question to you is this: can you fit 21.4 minutes a day into your schedule to keep yourself active, keep yourself healthy, and keep yourself fit? Well, a group did a research study and they asked a group of individuals, how much exercise do you get each week? Do you get at least 150 minutes a week? And interesting enough, 60+ percent of the people that they surveyed said yes, they get 150 minutes worth of moderate exercise every week. And then they did something very interesting. They put fitness trackers on them and they tracked them over time. And guess what they found? Instead of 60+ percent of the people getting at 150 minutes a week, what they found was the actual number was around 10%. Now, I've seen some studies that have said 17%, other studies that have said 6%, but 10% as compared to 60% that believe they're getting that amount. Now, when we think about the amount of exercise we're getting, and when we think about this word right here, moderate, what that means is we're not doing high intensity exercise here, we're just doing moderate levels of exercise. That means if you do 150 minutes a week of exercise, what you're going to be doing is not overall improving your fitness level and becoming stronger and fitter, you are going to be maintaining it. So if I want to become stronger and fitter, I'm going to have to go above 150 minutes a week, and I'm going to have to go beyond moderate type exercise. Now, sure, any type of exercise is good exercise. But if we're thinking about long term, where do I want to be 10 years from now on my fitness level? We need to take a look at the amount of exercise we're getting and the intensity of that exercise that we're adding in. And then most importantly, as I've said before, consistency over intensity. It's more important to be getting this 21.4 minutes a day of moderate exercise than trying to cram 150 minutes into a couple days just to get it into the week. All right, so 150 minutes a week is our challenge. The question is, can you fit that into your week? Let's see. Oh, and before we jump over into the main material, I just always want to point out to people, I love this quote: you don't learn anything from experiences you're not having. If you want to learn about how exercise is going to affect you, then we have to get out, we have to get active, and we have to experience that actual exercise to make this work. Okay, so let's jump over to the other whiteboard and talk about fit by the numbers. Okay, so the information today that I'm going to be talking to you about is fit by the numbers. And as I mentioned, this is part 2 of a video that I started before, talking about longevity, vitality, and overall fitness. Now, if you're not familiar with mind maps, that's what I have laid out up here on the whiteboard. In the center here is our central theme, fit by the numbers. Then branching off of that, just like chapters of a book, are the different sections. We're going to start up here with the big 3, and we're going to go clockwise around, ending up over here with results. Then off of those branches is the information that goes to that section. So I'll be connecting that for you as we go through. So what does fit by the numbers mean? Well, as I started moving into retirement, I started hearing a lot about things like sarcopenia. Well, sarcopenia is muscle loss. And I heard that it's a natural occurring process, which means that over time you're just going to have less and less muscle, or in other words, you become weaker over time. I also heard a lot about cardiorespiratory fitness, heart and lungs, and that over time that declines also. And I heard about bone density, that our bones become weaker over time. Well, that's all pretty scary, and I started thinking about those and looking into them, and I call those the big three. Now, the big three meaning that if you are really interested in your overall vitality, your longevity, your ability to remain independent, and your health span, then these up here, the big three, are critically important to us to understand how they are affecting these four items right here as I age. So let's start with the big three and start with muscle loss. Muscle loss is referred to as sarcopenia. Now, sarcopenia means it's a natural occurring process that over time our muscles become weaker. And it's estimated that we lose about 3 to 8% of our muscle mass every 10 years, 3 to 8%. Now, this really starts around age 30, and then I don't know why, but somewhere around age 60, it seems to accelerate. So maybe it gets up as high as 10%. But what that means is by the time I'm 70 years old, it's a possibility that I might have lost up to 50% of my muscle mass. That's pretty scary. Cardiorespiratory, heart and lungs. Now, the main way we measure our cardiorespiratory fitness is through a measurement called VO2 Max. Now, VO2 Max is my body's ability to process oxygen when it's under stress, or in other words, when I'm exercising very hard and when I'm breathing in a lot, I have to be able to process that oxygen and get that oxygen out to my muscles to allow me to keep exercising. Well, it's estimated that we lose our cardiorespiratory fitness, our VO2 max, at around 10% a decade. And again, that could be pretty scary because by the time I'm 70, I could have really decreased my heart and lung capacity to process oxygen. And third is bone density. Now, bone density is referred to as osteopenia. Osteopenia means that over time, it's a natural process that our bones are going to weaken. And if you are a male, that is someplace between 0.5% to 1% per year. If you're a female, 1% to 2% per year. So over time, as a natural occurring process, I'm losing muscle mass, my cardiorespiratory fitness is going down, and my bones are becoming weaker. Now, here's what I didn't hear when everybody was telling me about this is what's going to happen as you age. This will happen up here over time unless I take action to prevent that from happening. Well, my next question was this. Why is this also important? Well, it's important because it dramatically impacts my vitality, my overall longevity, and my ability to remain independent. I mean, let's think about it. If I'm losing muscle mass and I'm losing cardiorespiratory fitness, and I can't get myself up out of a chair, or I can't pick heavy things up, or worse yet, if I fall and I can't get back up off the ground simply because I'm too weak, it is definitely going to impact my ability to live independently. And that's one of the last things I think people would like to have happen to them. We don't want to lose our independence. Also, the big three dramatically impact my health span. Now, we have lifespan, the number of years we're going to be living, and health span. I would like to get those two numbers as close as I can together. Or in other words, health span means the number of years I'm living disease-free. without having to be under doctor's care or taking a lot of prescriptions, that number of years, I would like to get as close to my lifespan as I can. And if I could do that, that would be not only very important to me, it would definitely impact my ability to be independent, my overall longevity, and my vitality, the energy that I have that I can put into each day. So I had a question when I started thinking about these things. And my first question was this: can I, when it comes to the big three up here, either maintain what I currently have for muscle mass, cardiorespiratory fitness, and bone density, or can I actually reverse that? Do I have to lose, let's say, 8% a year with muscle mass? Or can I reverse that and not lose that 8% and actually put some muscle mass on? Or are all of those just going to decline no matter what? That was my question. So I would like to know which one of these three it is. And I have to be able to figure that out to have a better idea about how this is going to affect me overall. So here's what I discovered overall. First of all, what if I don't exercise, don't work on my cardiorespiratory fitness, and don't work on my bone density? What will happen? Well, if I do that, then I know I'm going to see a decline in these three areas. So by doing nothing, let me say that differently, by leading a sedentary lifestyle, I'm guaranteed that I'm going to lose muscle mass, my cardiorespiratory is going to go down, and my bones are going to get weaker. That's going to affect these four over here, and my overall health is going to be in decline. That's a given. So now what I want to know is, can I either reverse or at least maintain that from where I currently am? So that set up an interesting question to me, and what I decided to do was to do my own little study. Now, this is my N of 1 study. I only had one participant, that was me, and I wanted to see what can I do as an intervention to see how it would affect this over here. And I decided to do this over a period of 12 months. So I started in February of 2024, finished up this February, and that's what I want to share with you. So my study, N of 1, of me, consisted of the following parts: strength training, cardiorespiratory training, rest and recovery, sleep, and diet. Those were the areas that I focused on during that year's period of time. And I did this consistently over that year's period of time because I was really curious as to what was going to happen up here over a year of working on those. So let's start with strength training. The first thing I did was I put together my strength training plan, and to be upfront, I was already lifting weights before I started this, but I put one plan together that I was going to follow every week for the next year. That plan consisted of the following 6 items. I did a push exercise each week, like a push-up. I did a pull exercise during that time. I did squats. I did a hinge for hip mobility and strength. I did a lunge for my legs. And I did core exercises like planks to build up my core strength. Now, every week I made sure these 6 items were included in my workouts, and I did 2 to 3 of those workouts every week for 52 weeks. I also practiced what's called progressive overload. Now, progressive overload means this: if you start doing, let's say, a bicep curl, and you're doing that with a 20-pound weight, and you can do, let's say, 8, 9, 10 reps with that 20-pound weight, and then you realize, I really can't go any further, then that's the weight to start with. And you continue using that 20-pound weight week after week until all of a sudden you realize, hey, I can now do 10, 11, or 12 reps, and I'm getting stronger. At that point, I'm going to progressively overload by adding more weight. So instead of 20-pound weights, I'm going to go to 25-pound weights. Now with a 25-pound weight, what I find out is I can't do 12 anymore. I can get in 8. That's fine. You keep doing 8 until all of a sudden you can do 9 and 10 and 11, and then you go up to 30-pound weight. So in other words, you are progressively overloading your system to make it stronger, because we are adaptation machines. When we move our muscles, our bodies react to that by adapting to the load that is being put on it. And if I want to continue getting stronger over time, I have to keep progressively overloading the system. Now, if you have a set of 5-pound dumbbells and you've been lifting those 5-pound dumbbells for the last 2 years, at some point, when you started off, it was a little bit of a load, but at some point, it has now become so easy that there's no benefit, there's no gain in doing that. So sure, picking up the weight and moving it is fine. But if you want to become stronger, what I found is I have to keep overloading the system to become stronger over time. Now, I'm not talking huge amounts of weight here, and I have no interest in becoming a bodybuilder. I'm interested in being functionally strong. I want to be able to keep the muscle mass that I have so that overall I can remain independent and vital in what I'm doing. All right, so that was my strength training. That was the first part. 52 weeks, 2 to 3 times per week, doing those 6 items. Next up, cardiorespiratory, our heart and lungs. Now, when we start to work on these systems, I have to have a way of triggering the system. That's what progressive overload does. When a muscle isn't used to being used, and then we start using it, we trigger that system, and the system responds by adapting to the load that's being put on it, and it becomes stronger. Let me say that differently. No trigger, no growth. No trigger, over time, decline. And I will become weaker, and I'll lose muscle mass, I'll lose cardiorespiratory, and I will lose bone density. But if we trigger the system reacts over time by becoming stronger. Okay, so here's what I did. And by the way, this is what my process was. It isn't what I'm recommending for anyone else to go out and do. I just wanted to give you an idea not only what I did, but what the outcome was. So I added in a zone 2 training routine each week. Now, zone 2 means that my heart rate is at about 60 to 70% of maximum. For me, that would mean that my heart rate would need to be between 102 and 113 beats per minute. Now, zone 2 many times is referred to as endurance training, because when you're in zone 2, you're not at 100% here where you're doing it for a short period of time. You're able to keep doing this longer and longer. You're building up your endurance over time. Now, if you're operating at 60 to 70% of your maximum heart rate, one way you can tell if you're in zone 2 or not is that you can carry on a conversation with someone. And if you can't carry on that conversation because you're gasping for air, then that means you're way beyond this 60 to 70%. So I sat down, figured out what my zones were. Generally, we look at 5 zones when it comes to zone training. Zone 1 would be sedentary, sitting still, doing nothing. Zone 5 would be maximum output, where you are gasping for air, and you can only do this for a short duration of time. Zone 2, I'm doing this repeatedly, 3 to 4 times per week. And since I like bicycling and I like running, I'm now mixing this up. So some days I would run, some days I would bicycle. When I'm on the bicycle, sometimes I'm out for 4 to 6 hours at a time, and I'm trying to keep that heart rate right between this level right here. Okay, zone 2 was the first thing I did, 3 to 4 times per week. The second thing I added in was what's referred to as HIIT, high intensity interval training. I did 1 HIIT session per week, and my HIIT session was the following. I would do a 5-minute workup to start raising my heart rate up and warm up my muscles. Then I would do a 30-second all-out sprint. Now, when I'm doing an all-out sprint, I want to drive my heart rate up as high as I can go, and that generally is going to be someplace between 134 and 144 beats per minute. That's zone 5. I'm going to do this for 30 seconds. Then I do a 90-second recovery, let my heart rate drop back down, and then I repeat that. And I would do this 4 times in a row, once per week. So again, 5-minute warm-up, 30-second sprint. I have a hill very close to where we live here. I'd get to the bottom of the hill. I'd run as hard as I could up the hill, get my heart rate up above 134 beats per minute, then a 90-second recovery, let your heart rate come back down, and I'd repeat that. Now, one thing I found was this. The more you become conditioned to doing this, the more you keep triggering your system to do this, and the stronger it becomes, the faster your heart rate recovers. So if you're starting off doing a HIIT training program and you drive your heart rate up and your heart rate comes down very, very slowly, that's usually a pretty good indication that you're not conditioned yet. And as you become more and more conditioned, what you'll find is that your heart rate will drop very quickly. So here's what I found. When I'm up above 134 beats per minute, during that 90 seconds, my heart rate's going to drop someplace between 22 and 26 beats per minute. That puts me back down and almost into this area right here. And then I repeat that, drive it up again, let it come back down. All right, so HIIT training once a week, zone 2 training 3 to 4 times a week, weightlifting 2 to 3 times per week. Busy schedule. Next up, those are the first 2 elements of this. Next, what I had to determine was how much rest and recovery do I need, and when do I need to rest and recover? Little known fact, recovery time is improvement time. We become stronger when we are recovering. We don't become stronger when we're actually over here lifting weights. Because when you're lifting the weight, when you're picking that up and working that muscle over and over again, you end up with small tears in your muscles. Then we go into rest and recovery. The muscle repairs itself, becomes stronger, and we become fitter. So this takes on a whole new level of importance to make sure that you're getting enough rest and recovery. Or in other words, if I go out and lift weights 7 days a week, at some point in time, my body's going to break down. It's going to say enough, and I'm going to become injured. So I don't want to push that level, and I need to build in recovery time so that I can become stronger. So I gauged 2 different things to determine how fast am I recovering. My first is my resting heart rate. So first thing in the morning when I would get up, I have a little device I slip over my finger. It's just like when you go to the doctor and they want to see what your blood oxygen level is. It takes just a couple seconds, you turn it on, and it will tell you your resting heart rate. Now for me, my resting heart rate in the morning is someplace between 38 and 42 beats per minute. Now, that's just my resting heart rate. That doesn't have to be anybody else's resting heart rate. So don't look at someone else's resting heart rate and go, that's the goal, or that should be mine. It depends upon how conditioned you are, how much endurance training you do, and how fit your cardiorespiratory system is. If I've been working out really hard over time, and if I haven't had enough rest and recovery, what I'm going to see over time here is that my resting heart rate is going to start coming up. So if I get up in the morning, my resting heart rate's at say 45, 46 beats per minute, that's a signal to me that I need to back off a little bit. If it continues and it goes up maybe as high as 50 beats per minute, that means I'm really fatigued and I need to, again, back off and do some rest and recovery. If I wake up in the morning and my resting heart rate's around 40, 42, that says to me I'm in pretty good shape, and I can then go out and take on my next amount of exercise. Okay, second thing that I gauged is called heart rate variability, HRV. Now, you can track HRV with a Garmin watch, you can track HRV with a chest strap and an app on your phone. There's numbers of ways you can do this, but heart rate variability is the difference in time between your heartbeats. So if your heart is beating at 60 beats per minute, that doesn't mean that in between each beat is a second. Sometimes it's shorter, sometimes it's longer, and it's unique to the person. Now, my HRV, when I am rested and in good shape, is somewhere around 72. Now, that's unique to the person. So you can't look at it and go, is that too high or too low? That's not the point. You just need to know what your HRV is. And interesting enough with HRV is that if I don't have enough rest and recovery, or if I might be getting ready to come down with maybe the flu or a cold or something, my heart rate variability will go down. Now, if my resting heart rate is going up and my heart rate variability is going down, that's a clear indication to me I need more rest and recovery, because I'm either fatigued or I'm getting ready to get ill, and I want to make sure that I can counteract that. So I track my HRV every day. I track my resting heart rate every morning, and I pay close attention to what those numbers are to give me an idea how much rest and recovery I need. I think we do a disservice to ourselves by thinking this isn't too important. What's important is here and here. No, they all work together, and I need to make sure that I'm getting enough of this so I can continue doing this here. All right, last. I'm a big believer in infrared saunas, and I use an infrared sauna 5 times a week. So after a hard strength training workout or after a hard HIIT interval workout, I'm in the sauna and I do 5 30-minute sections a week. And I think it does wonders for helping me recover and get ready for the next amount of effort that I'm going to put in. Okay, so that's the first 3. Strength training, cardiorespiratory training, my rest and recovery. Next up, sleep. This was one area before that I never really paid a lot of attention to, but everything that I read said we really need to pay attention to our sleep cycle, and our sleep cycle is our time that we go to sleep and the time that we wake up. And our body likes consistency. So what I decided to do was to set a time as to when I was going to go to bed at night and a time that I was going to wake up in the morning, and I tried to stay as consistent to that time as I could. Now, sure, there were some times I went to bed later than that, sometimes I went to bed earlier than that, and other things intervene over time. But overall, I really stayed as consistent as I can be. And what I found was that I needed about 7.5 hours of sleep a night. I felt the best, my resting heart rate was good, and my heart rate variability showed me this was really the number that I needed, 7.5 hours. One thing I really want to stress here, this needs to be consistent. The more consistent you are with your sleep, the more your body knows what it can rely upon as far as what you're going to do to help it rest and recover. All right, next up, diet. With diet, what I started looking at more closely was my macros. Now, your macros are comprised of 3 things: your protein intake, your fat intake, and your carb intake. When you look at your macros, I never really paid a lot of attention to them in the past, so I tried to have adequate amount of protein, whatever that means. I really didn't pay too much attention to the fats in my diet, and sometimes I would eat more carbs and sometimes I'd eat less carbs, and I thought I really need to get a better idea of how to work with these 3. Now, I don't know what took me so long to figure this out, but what I found at about 6 months into my little N of 1 study here was this, and it just dawned on me one day that to repair your muscles and to become stronger, you need to have adequate protein intake. For cellular structure, we need adequate fat intake. And to replenish myself so I can go back out and do more either zone 2 or HIIT training, I need to replenish carbohydrates that are being used up when I'm exercising. So what I started experimenting with was this. I tried to keep my protein and fats as stable as I could. So I tried to get exactly the same amount of grams of protein and fat every day, 7 days a week. I didn't change that. But what I did change was my carbohydrates. So on the days when I would go out and do a really long zone 2 training session, let's say 5 hours on the bicycle, I need more carbohydrates to replenish myself because I have used those all up because of muscles. Now, our muscles store glycogen, and glycogen comes from the sugars when we process the carbs. When we burn through those glycogen stores, we need to replace that by increasing our carbohydrate intake. Aha! That means during days of rest and recovery, when I'm not doing zone 2 training or not doing a HIIT training, and maybe I'm just walking that day, I'm going to decrease the amount of carbs that I'm eating. So on high intensity days, carbs would go up. Low intensity days, carbohydrates would come down. Proteins and fats, I tried to stay as stable as I could with that, and this was an absolute game changer for me. I not only felt better, but I recovered better. I could tell that by tracking my resting heart rate and my heart rate variability. Also, I felt better after a workout when my body was used to getting a certain amount of protein and fats every day. Now, the grams of fat and the grams of protein and the grams of carbohydrates that I'm getting isn't important. What's important is to take a look at your own exercise and get an idea of how much this is, and then try keeping it stable over a period of time and see how you feel. Now, we know this, as we age, we don't process proteins as well as we did when we were younger. So to counteract that, I need to increase my protein intake. So as a general guideline for me, I kept my proteins around 30% of my total calories. I kept my fats around 25% of my total calories, and I adjusted my carbs up and down depending upon the load that I was placing on it. And as I just said, this was a game changer. This really made a huge difference in how I felt and how I recovered. Okay, next up. These are the 5 items that I was doing during that year. What I wanted to see was, what type of effect is that having overall on me in these 3 areas: muscles, cardiorespiratory, and bone density. And to do that, I needed data. I needed a way of looking at that wasn't subjective. Now, if I took a subjective point of view, I could say, well, I feel stronger a year later, or maybe I'm running a little bit faster or bicycling a little bit faster, and I wouldn't have any idea with bone density because I wouldn't have any way of knowing that. So what I did was I went out and had 3 different types of tests done during the year. The first test I did was a DEXA scan that looked at your fat and muscle distribution in your body. And I did 4 DEXA scans during the year. So I started in February, I did the first DEXA scan, and then every 90 days I did another DEXA scan. What this looks at is the amount of muscle mass that you have on your body and where those muscles are. Are they in your trunk, midsection, chest? Where are they? Where are they stored? Then it also looks at fat. It looks at visceral fat and subcutaneous fat and where it's stored on the body. So I had a starting point here that I could look at over the year to see how is this affecting that. Next, I took a bone density scan. Now I did both of these at the same place, but they were 2 different scans. And I had 4 bone density scans during the year. Now with a bone density scan, it looked at 3 different areas. It looked at the bones in my hips, it looked at my spine, and it looked at my neck. And every 90 days I would go in, get rescanned, and then get the numbers back about how my bone density was changing over time. Because remember, according to osteopenia, I'm going to lose around 1% a year or 10% a decade. All right, next up, I went in for a VO2 Max test. Now, if you've never taken a VO2 Max test, you go into a lab. They're going to hook you up to some probes and a chest strap. That is all connected to a computer. They put a mask over your face so they can measure how much oxygen is coming in, how much carbon dioxide is going out. And they put you on a treadmill, and they start the treadmill up. And after you warm up, they start increasing the speed of the treadmill and increasing the incline. And then they get you going as fast, as hard as you can until you can't go any further. Or in other words, you're exercising yourself to exhaustion. When you get done with the test will tell you what your VO2 max is. Or in other words, under extreme load, how efficient is your cardiorespiratory system for handling oxygen. Now, my VO2 max when I went in, and I've been bicycling and running for a long time, but my VO2 max when I went in was 40. Now for my age group, that put me in the top 10% for my age group, and I was quite happy with 40. So my goal with VO2 max over the year was I just really wanted to maintain it. I just didn't want VO2 max to go down. Of these 3 up here, I think VO2 max is by far the critical measurement we need to pay attention to. Because if we lose cardiorespiratory fitness, that means we become weaker over time. And then we get to the point where we can't go up the steps unaided, or we can't pick up a heavy load and carry it because we just don't have the energy because our body can't process oxygen properly enough to keep us energized and moving. So VO2 max, I did 2 of these during the year, and I started off with 40. So what I did with the items that I've talked about here in my N of 1 study, that is how I was measuring it. And after a year, here's my results. Now, I'm not going to go over all the numbers of the results. I just really want to look at this from a higher level because I would have to be able to show you all of the DEXA scans, the bone density scans, and the VO2 max tests to support those numbers. But here's what I looked at the end of the year. What happened with my muscle mass? Because I knew where I was starting from with my DEXA scan. What happened to my bone density? I knew that from the scan also. What happened to my VO2 max? And then when you take a DEXA scan, they give you a body composition score, and it's a letter. So for me, my good news is this. After a year, I didn't see any decline in muscle mass. I didn't maintain my muscle mass. I reversed that. Instead of losing 8 to 10% over a decade, I actually put muscle mass on. So this was a real shock to me to say, if you really do this over time, do you have to get weaker over time? For me, no, it didn't. I went the other way. I gained muscle mass. So I actually reversed that process and have more muscle mass now than when I started. Next, bone density. Again, osteopenia says about 1% a year I should be experiencing that my bones are getting weaker. Well, remember I looked at my hips, my spine, and my neck. And the good news is after a year, those 3 areas not only became denser, stronger, they actually became larger. So we know this, when you put a load on your muscles, and your muscles are connected to your bones, the bones respond by getting stronger. Remember, I said we have to trigger the system? Well, we trigger the system and the bone becomes stronger over time because it recognizes there's a load being put on top of that, and it has to respond to that by adapting. Now, if I'm sedentary and sitting, the body says there's no need to have strong bones, and you will then see a loss in bone density, and you will see a loss in bone size. So for me, my bone density increased in my hips, my spine, and my neck. Next up, VO2 Max. When I went back for my VO2 Max test and I looked at that, all I was hoping for was this. If I still have 40 at the end of the year, I'd have been tickled pink. The good news was when I went back, my VO2 Max actually went up to 42. Now, that shocked me the no end, and at 42, that puts me in the top 5% for my age group. Again, I think this is, of all the tests out there, this is the most important one. Because if I can maintain my cardiorespiratory fitness, how my body processes and handles oxygen, that keeps me vital. And that vitality is going to allow me to remain independent longer over time. Last up, my body composition score. My body composition score at the end of the year, after doing the 4 DEXA scans, was an A+, which I was very pleased with because it looks at the composition of your body when it comes to fat and muscle. And what I wanted to see was not only where on my body was I putting the muscle on, because that would tell me which one of these exercises to do more of or less of. And it also gives me an idea of fat distribution on my body, and most importantly, visceral fat, the fat that you can't see, the fat that goes in around the organs. That's the one that we really need to be aware of. So a year later, my results, not saying it's everybody's results, and I'm not saying everybody should even consider going out and doing this, because it took a huge amount of effort. But the payoff was this. My cardiorespiratory improved, my bone density improved, and my muscle mass improved. To me, that was critically important because that's going to allow me to remain vital with energy. It's going to impact my longevity. It's going to allow me to remain independent for a longer period of time. And remember, my goal here is this. With health span, I want to get that as close as I can to lifespan. That is my overall goal in working with this. Now, in thinking about that, there's 2 things that are really important to me out of doing this. Number one is, I've already mentioned it, put your health span as close as you can to your lifespan. Number 2, I don't want to be a consumer of healthcare services. I don't want to have to be running to the doctor all the time or have to go back in for repeats or more tests or more medications over time. That is just not the way I want to live my life. So the question was, can I take steps to reverse these problems? And the answer for me was absolutely. Now, if that's of interest to you, I would recommend thinking about doing your own N of 1 study. Give it a try. Try increasing your strength and your cardiorespiratory training. Definitely improve your rest and recovery and your sleep, and take a good hard look at what you're eating on a regular basis as far as how your macros break down. Now, like anything else, if you're going to make a change in your exercise, a change in anything that you're doing as far as your lifestyle, go to your doctor first, tell them what you're thinking about doing, and get their approval, because that's exactly what I did. I go in every year in February for my yearly physical. At the end of my physical in February 2024, I laid out for the doctor these items and said, here's what I'm thinking about doing, anything I should be concerned about, and he cleared me to do that. So before you go heading off and trying doing that, get it checked out by your medical professional first. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to this. I hope it gives you some insight as to thinking about the big 3 and paying attention to, am I suffering from sarcopenia, osteopenia, and how's my cardiorespiratory health? The information that's provided in my videos comes from my own personal experience and is not intended to be guidance or medical advice.